Do you pick and choose? Let's face it, on some level, we all pick and choose what we think is more or less important. That's what we do as autonomous, free-thinking human beings. What the Torah challenges us to do, though, is not to completely give up our rational thought processes. Of course not. We have to keep thinking. But how can we be consistent and follow as many of the laws of the Torah themselves, even when they don't particularly resonate with us? You know, we've got the Ten Commandments in this week's Parsha. And the first time the Ten Commandments are revealed to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, it begins by God saying that the Lord spoke all of these words, saying, Et kol hadvarim ha'eleh. And what does it mean that God spoke all of these words? And the sages teach that when God gave over the Torah, the Ten Commandments to the Jewish people, He spoke all of them b'dibur echad, in one utterance, something which is impossible for a human being. You and I cannot say two things at the same time. God Almighty can. He said all 10 commandments in one utterance. And somehow our ancestors were able to understand it, because God can do anything. But what was the significance of God saying over all 10 commandments, which are repeated in this week's Parsha in one utterance? It's to teach us that we should not make these kinds of calculations that we always do in terms of what we think is more or less important. Right? Shabbos, that's, incredibly important, of course. But the way I speak, if I say a little something about another person, we call in Hebrew Lashon Hara, is that really such a big deal? Or just the other way around, love your neighbor as yourself. We thankfully live in a society where we, most people believe in that. But how many of us are careful to declare every penny we make when we are, doing our taxes? Is that really so important? Is that, does God really care about that? Does He really care that, that my clothing, if it has some wool, that it isn't mixed in with some linen, so I got to get my suits checked? That's called shatnez. Seems like such an obscure, irrelevant, insignificant mitzvah. But God spoke all of these words in one utterance to tell us that we should not be making these calculations. These are human calculations based on whatever it is we've been raised to kind of value or not value. And it's a very human thing to do. We all do it. But at least we can be aware that there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah, and our job, our task, our mission, if you choose to accept it, is to try as best as we can to be like true servants in carrying out each and every mitzvah and taking everything just as seriously as the next. And I always say this, there are no bolds or underlines or asterisks in the Torah to give us an indication that God, that one's important, but this one, not so important. Every expression of the Almighty, every commandment that God has privileged us to observe has a power and an energy of its own. And if we only take the mitzvot that we think are important, if we only take those mitzvot seriously, then we're only releasing that spiritual energy into the world. We're only perfecting ourselves in that way, but we're leaving out other means of perfection that we and the world need. So the next time we pick up the Torah and we find a mitzvah, or we hear something that these Jews people are doing that doesn't seem so significant, ask one question. Is it in the Torah? Is it something which is part of our Jewish tradition? And if it is, let's try our best to take it as seriously as we would anything else. Shabbat Shalom.